Hey everybody, welcome back to CoronaChat. I'm Caitlin. Today is Tuesday, June 9th. And first we just wanted to say that we appreciate you all letting us take some time over the last week or so to grieve and just be in community. This is a pretty intense moment in the United States, given the kind of multiple intersecting public health crises that we're living right now. Some that are new and some that are not so new. And we just appreciate you giving us some space to just sit with some of the heaviness of that. So we're coming back to this work this week with renewed energy and commitment, and we're glad to be back here with you all today. In the last week, while the CoronaChat's been offline, there have been some pretty big pieces of coronavirus news. And tonight we're going to try to give a quick rundown of two of these big stories. But if you have questions and want us to do a deeper dive, just leave us a comment, send us a note. We're happy to go deeper. And tomorrow we'll start to pick up with the questions that you sent in over the course of the time that we've been offline. So the first big piece of news last week came out of Sweden. If you follow us on Facebook, you may have seen the news article we posted about this, but if not, we just wanted to give you an update. So Dr. Anders Tegnell is the state epidemiologist in Sweden, and he's been the main defender of the country's coronavirus approach, which has included keeping most businesses open, discouraging mask use, and asking citizens to be vigilant about washing their hands and maintaining social distancing. So Sweden got a lot of press about trying to achieve herd immunity, which their government has actually repeatedly said they were not trying to do, though they did say that one side effect of their more relaxed approach might be increased population-level immunity, which might be helpful in the event of a future second wave. So last week, Dr. Tegnell told Swedish radio that the Swedish approach of just keeping everything really relaxed and open was misguided and has resulted in far too many deaths. While he's not endorsing a full lockdown, he did say that if they had to do it all over again, Sweden probably would take a different approach that's more aligned with what other countries have done. For perspective, and at the time that Dr. Tegnell said this last week, there had been a total of 4,562 deaths in Sweden, which may sound like a small number, but that's 45 deaths per 100,000 residents of the country. Remember, Sweden has an overall population that's pretty small. And so overall, although the overall number of deaths is much smaller than, for example, the US, right, the country with the most number of COVID deaths worldwide, when you control for the size of the population, COVID's actually been more deadly in Sweden than it has in the US. And for those who are interested, at the time that Dr. Tegnell's statement was made, the US was reporting 33 deaths per 100,000 residents, just for comparison. So importantly, Dr. Björn Olsen, an infectious disease epidemiologist at Uppsala University in Sweden, who's been very critical of the Swedish government's strategy, said that this decision not to impose strong coronavirus laws and restrictions was based on the mistaken belief that COVID would act like a normal flu, right? Very contagious, but moving through the population quickly. You could think of this kind of like a tornado, right? And instead, the coronavirus has proved slower, but much more deadly, infecting and killing large numbers of vulnerable people, such as the elderly living together in a nursing home. So if the flu is a tornado, you can think about coronavirus like a hurricane, right? Much more slow moving, but ultimately maybe doing more damage. And as we've said before in CoronaChat, part of what's so difficult in responding appropriately to the novel coronavirus is precisely the novelty factor, right? This is a brand new virus and we don't know exactly how it will act. As the pandemic continues, we learn more about it, making us better able to figure out how we might be able to stop it. But unfortunately, the mistakes that we make in the process of learning are very costly. So the other big blockbuster piece of coronavirus news this week had to do with our old friend hydroxychloroquine. We've talked a lot about hydroxychloroquine and its sister drug chloroquine on CoronaChat, and many of us thought that we'd kind of heard the last word several weeks ago when The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, the top two medical journals in the world, published the results of this very, very large clinical trial using data pulled from hospitals all over the world that seemed to show definitively that hydroxychloroquine was making coronavirus patients worse. Based on these publications, the World Health Organization stopped the hydroxychloroquine arm of their clinical trial, and scientists and public health professionals all over the world urged physicians to please, please, please stop giving their COVID patients these drugs. But then some scientists reading those articles noticed that some of the numbers didn't quite add up. And they asked for the authors of the study to check the analysis, and particularly the analysis done by one of the co-authors, a guy named Dr. Sapan Desai, and his data analytics company, Surgisphere. The authors agreed and brought in a third party to redo the analysis so that there wouldn't be any concern about bias or mistakes made by the original authors, right? They brought in an independent data analysis team. And when they did, Surgisphere refused to hand over the data and allowed that third team to do their independent analysis, which seemed kind of strange at first, until it turned out that actually none of those patients in the Surgisphere database ever existed. Or, they may have existed as real people, but they weren't real COVID patients involved in a rigorous clinical trial. And those papers that were sent to the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine were fraudulent. Now, this, of course, is a huge blow to the world. Right? We're living in the middle of a crisis, people are dying, and someone just decided to make up an entire 2 studies while people's lives hang in the balance. If you're upset, you have a right to be, and I will admit I'm pretty upset too. That said, I am trying to stay focused on the positive, right? So, the first is that the scientific community is reading these papers with a careful and critical eye, checking that all the numbers add up, right? Looking at all the figures and the footnotes, and asking for more proof when something seems off, even when the results show them something that they think is probably true. This is a critical part of science, and it's proof that scientists are paying attention and not just accepting something because it was published in a prestigious journal. So this is a good thing. The scientific community is also doing a lot of soul searching right now around and saying, how is it possible that something so fraudulent could have gotten published not once but twice in premier journals in the field? And people are talking about what flaws might be inherent to the peer review system and what needs to be changed to prevent this from happening in the future. And this is a good thing. I'd be very worried if the scientific community said, oh, well, that happens every now and then. No, this is, a crisis moment, and the scientific community is taking it very seriously, which I think is good. The third thing is that the World Health Organization looked very carefully at everything that happened and decided that, based on what we now know, that they needed to restart their clinical trials. Since the 2 studies were fake, we don't have any rigorous clinical trial data to show whether chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine are helpful or harmful. Right? So while the observational trials that we had before seemed to suggest that hydroxychloroquine was not helpful, those studies still have the same inherent problems that they did when we talked about them before on CoronaChat, right? Like the fact that people who received hydroxychloroquine were on average sicker than people who didn't. So the World Health Organization has decided that the responsible thing to do right now is to restart their clinical trial and keep really, really close tabs on all of the participating hospitals to make sure that the data are legitimate so that we can try to get to the bottom of this. So again, I think doing the responsible thing, even though we're all pretty frustrated right now. So that said, all of this that we've talked about today might not have you feeling too good about scientists and experts, and I can totally understand where that's coming from. But I think that what these stories show us is that any one expert, no matter how expert they are, is still only human and can make mistakes. Right? This is why we need to have robust scientific community that looks at the data, debates all of the possible interpretations, asks really hard probing questions, and then comes to an overall consensus that once everybody kind of agrees based on these really hard discussions. Because while one person can pretty easily be wrong, it's harder for a whole group to be wrong, especially when that group is allowed to have open, honest discussion and look at the facts together. So what we really hope is that CoronaChat actually can be that kind of space for all of us, too. So please, write in with your thoughts and comments. We're all learning about this together from each other, and by sharing what each of us know as a group, we can get a little bit closer to the truth. So, as always, drop your comments below, send us a note. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever it is that you're watching, but we really would love to hear from you and how you're making sense of all of this as we try to figure out how to brave this new reality together. So stay safe out there, take care of one another, and we will see you back here tomorrow night.